We're back with a Video Game Chronicles news article. An open world Final Fantasy XVI would have taken 15 years to make, claims producer Naoki Yoshida. It is practically impossible to ask for everything. Well, Mr. Producer, I humbly disagree. While I do believe it's practically impossible to deliver on all requests, it is not impossible to ask. One thing I believe Yoshi P is doing well with this title is telling players what they can expect, or in this case, what not to expect. It still leaves room for speculation and theories, but we will not be seeing an open world on the scale of Final Fantasies of old. There is a lot of questions in my mind whether this game will resemble the beautifully crafted hallways of Final Fantasy XIII, or if it will be more familiar to the zones of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy XVI's producer has claimed the reason the game doesn't have an open world is because it would have taken a decade and a half to make. In a new interview in the latest issue of Famitsu magazine, Naoki Yoshida explained that he felt other elements were more important to him than defining what made a Final Fantasy game, and trying to make it open world on top of everything else would have been a step too far. When I played the first Final Fantasy, I thought, this is a movie-like gaming experience. What elements could be more important than an open world? Characters, scenarios, stakes, emotional connections, Final Fantasy tropes like chocobos, moogles, summons, catastrophic world events, or legendary villains. What elements would make this a top-tier Final Fantasy game? And what was Yoshi P's first Final Fantasy? Let me know if you know in the comments below. The production, the dialogue timing, the drama, the sound, they all combine to create the greatest gaming experience possible. Once a chocobo or moogle was included, I thought it was already a Final Fantasy experience. That game experience must be felt in Final Fantasy XVI as well. Nope, hard disagree. While I do believe that Yoshi P is right, that moogles and chocobos are tropes of the Final Fantasy series, there needs to be something else. These are simply prerequisites, and then there are things that make a game feel Final Fantasy. There needs to be conflict. Sometimes that can be immediately grand in design, like Sin from Final Fantasy X, or as simple as being a disgruntled ex-employee, like in Final Fantasy VII, or maybe just trying to run away from home, as in Final Fantasy IX. There has to be overwhelming odds against you, powerful gods in the forms of primals, eidolons, summons, or icons. There has to be lessons about life, about friendship, about selflessness, existentialism, and belonging. And maybe this is just a few of my assigned attachments to the series, but for me these feelings are always present and always necessary. Additionally, it is necessary to understand the overall outline of the game design by taking into account the strengths of the team itself. When thinking about it, I thought, I believe an open world would not fit for what we are planning now. The world of Valisthea is massive, very political, and conflict is stirring. The characters at face value seem to be intertwined in the imminent conflict, and a clear antagonist is shrouded in mystery, although we're probably all considering the Empire. Focusing in on these relationships and how our hero Clive and his brother Joshua play into this storyline has the potential to be far more riveting than walking across massive, open zones, and if you don't believe me, log into Final Fantasy XI. When working on any project or in any team, you're hindered by the slowest member in any given department. Sure, you can replace the person or people by gaining a new teammate, but then you have a new slowest person, and your hope is that it's not you. The team at Creative Business Unit 3 has yet to disappoint with a story in Final Fantasy XIV, and I have hopes that the same will be true for this next title. Listing the main aims for this project, Yoshida said, I want a story of a hero who saves the world, because this is Final Fantasy. I want a summon to go wild and destroy the map. I want to release this game as soon as possible. I cannot release this game in parts. When considering these four main points, I believe it is practically impossible to ask for everything. If we had a development period of about 15 years, we may have had the opportunity of challenging ourselves with an open world. Smiles. After all, it's almost impossible in terms of time and costs to create a global story within an open world. So a savior, summons, release the game as soon as possible, and cannot release in parts, i.e. must be a complete game. Now, these are all good things, but releasing a complete game and not in parts doesn't sound like this generation of Final Fantasy at all, as the last complete Final Fantasy title released was Final Fantasy XII on the PlayStation 2. He added, I thought that the development team would be worried about this. Delivering what we believe is the best story and an experience that blends together games and movies does not require an open world. It's true that blending games and movies doesn't require an open world, but you have to break away from the gameplay of Final Fantasy XIII, where the majority of the fights genuinely felt like you could hit play and it would be impossible to fail. For example, if you say, I have a good idea and I can definitely do it, I will support you. However, if you're unsure if we should do it, I would tell you that we shouldn't. Yoshida has previously said that the game's story takes place on a global scale, and that an open-world environment wouldn't suit the story as a result. What's terrifying about this is it sounds truly risk-adverse, and if we never tried to do new things, we wouldn't have made the strides in gaming that we see today. We wouldn't have the different types of combat, or the beautiful storytelling techniques across the industry. As far as open world goes, I believe if we are basing open world on previous Final Fantasy titles, we are looking for airship travel, secret locations, side quests, and hidden characters. Even games like Final Fantasy VII that were open world had zones with dungeons. It wasn't one massive open world. I personally don't want to be trapped in a loading screen or forced into collecting a bajillion items scattered throughout the map. That's it for today's interview. Do you think the open world is necessary in current generation of video games for it to be Game of the Year quality? Let me know in the comments below. Also, remember to like, share, and subscribe, as it truly does help the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.